Hello my friends. So we're now up to a look in the dark, chapter 11, which is entitled Bandit Country. Danny Green was thinking the investigation through. They were now fighting Stanhurst on 3 fronts, maybe even 4 if Theo's output was also measured in. First there was Sue sorting out mammoth amounts of records from the criminal's office. She was fast and her heart was committed to the cause, so she was worrying those records like a dog with a rat. She'd even worked on Sunday to complete some more Northern Ireland information for Danny and Carol to take with them, and her work was so well laid out, so neat. Whenever someone of officialdom was preparing a case for court, it would be Sue's translations of the uncoded records that would bring the greatest pleasure. What pleased Danny most though was the questions Sue was asking about the birds. She was coming to bird watching through the back door, and Danny was going to make sure that the back door was wide open for her. The second front involved Sir Richard Claymore. Danny smiled as he thought about that avenue of the work in hand. Ricky had not been too keen to go to Eastleigh and do some private investigating of his own, having a strong preference to pay someone else to put their neck on the block. However, when Danny had put it to him that Theo's registration number input had resulted in Carol's traffic-up brother-in-law supplying an address and name in Eastleigh, and as the Greens were about to go out to Ireland, someone else would have to see what they could learn about John Moore, Stanhurst's frequent visitor. Ricky had agreed that he could manage that. Danny had persuaded him by comparing the short trip from Bournemouth into Hampshire with the much talked about trips to Paris for the gastronomic delights there. When the positive attitude about dealing with it came from Rick's lips, Danny had told him to be careful because who would pay their wages if he wasn't able to? More seriously though, he had suggested another vehicle as the Jaguar would be easily traced to him. Sir Richard had hit on the idea of using an ageing and untaxed Royal Enfield motorcycle that had belonged to an uncle of his. Not really sure of his friend's skill as a biker, Danny agreed that something less easily connected to Sir Richard would be best, and the inherited bike seemed to fit that need. Richard assured Danny that he would be careful, and not only for the sake of his own health, but also to protect the investigation. So here he was, Sir Richard Claymore, out on the high wire with Danny and Carol. "He'll be fine, Danny boy," Carol had assured her husband. "He's a survivor, and if they found him with the crown jewels, he'd have some half-feasible alibi to offer in defence." Danny had nodded his agreement, and Sue had expressed an ever-increasing desire to meet this unusual and intriguing aristocrat. The third front involved Danny and Carol and the trip they would make over the Irish Sea, flying out of Bristol's Lowesgate Airport the next day. Carol was of course feeling ecstatic at the opportunity to see her family and the land she loved, but Danny couldn't really figure out why he was taking the investigation to Ireland. He guessed the combination of his burning anger when he had translated the first record and the strong desire Carol had to spend some time with the family had led him to act on a hunch that there would be value in gathering facts there. He hoped he wasn't going to waste valuable time. He looked again at the record from Stanhurst's office which bore the name Michael O'Connor. He read the awful text it contained. Raptors, dead or alive. Stuffed birds and animals, eggs, anything. He felt certain again that he wanted to bring this individual's career to a speedy end. He looked at the map. Castle Durg seemed to be about 50 miles from Carol's parents' farm near Dungannon. He'd never visited the area before, that far west up near the border with County Donegal, northern county of the Irish Republic. Looking at the high barren land around Castle Durg on the Ordnance Survey map, he again questioned himself. Was he mad? Did he know what he was doing? After all, it was sheer instinct leading him rather than a calculated wisdom. Could he really trust instinct? Well, a young cuckoo had to. It had no parent bird to lead it on its way to Africa. And he thought that was about the best advertisement for instinct he could think of, which should have been just fine, except that word cuckoo seemed to suggest something far removed from wisdom. Michael O'Connor was not the only person that Danny hoped to seek out in Ireland. There was another in Belfast. However, as Carol was already sleeping soundly at his side and he could feel the work of the day had stolen his energy, he switched off the bedside lamp and cuddled up to his wife, and even as he drifted slowly into the midway state between conscious thought and sleep, he imagined himself being a commanding officer in a war operations room somewhere. Now the invasion was closing in and it was on 3 fronts, but the enemy was unaware of the advancing forces It seemed somewhat alien for him to be thinking like that, as he was a man totally opposed to violence, and he'd already long felt that in the event of war and conscription he'd have to accept the consequences of being a conscientious objector, maybe prison, or even in extreme times in a stormy climate, a firing squad. Yet here he was in a kind of war. It was not so much the saving of a country, but rather protecting a part of the beautiful cobweb of life on planet Earth. Danny was convinced that if people like Stanast were allowed to do as they liked with priceless resources bearing the spirit of life, then the end results would be similar to those produced by all-out nuclear war. True, the latter would be fast, like the speed of light, and the other would be slow, like an oil slick on a calm sea, but the final result would be like the difference between being burned and being suffocated. If death is the end result, does it make much difference? As Danny lay there thinking all this through, he remembered a conversation he once had at the motor factors with an ex-RAF officer who had been serving at the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis. The words "constant alert" and 6-minute warning had stuck in Danny's mind. The former pilot had told him that if they'd been sent into the sky in those 6 minutes, they were drop their bombs on the chosen targets in the Soviet bloc, but not to return to England because there would be nothing to return to. This conversation had shocked him, even though he was not 100% sure of its accuracy. Maybe the RAF type was exaggerating, but he still shuddered at the thought. Danny knew that the whole jewel, named by a man Earth, had been a knife edge and nearly suffered a fatal heart attack at that time. October 1962 could have been the funeral of the modern world. As Danny lay there a couple of decades later, he realised that nuclear war was still possible, but there was another threat: pollution, destruction of rainforests, pillage of vital resources for the enrichment of a few, exploitation of life forms, even to the point of distinction. He knew he didn't have all the answers, but he was very happy that he was doing something positive to fight back. The squabbling and cackling and some fighting cats outside interrupted his half-conscious meditations, and as that subsided, Danny Green slid into restful sleep. The Jersey European Fokker Friendship F-21 to F-27 taxied along the runway in beautiful sunshine. Carol Green squeezed her husband's hand. "How you doing, Danny boy?" "Fine, Carol, just fine." "This is the bit I love best. The revving engines, the burst of speed and all, the ground falling away. Just beats all the fairground rides I was ever on. All the more in these smaller planes with propellers." Seconds later they were accelerating toward their appointment with the clear blue sky and 35 other passengers in the aircrew. Danny watched the sunlight glinting on the wing as the undercarriage folded away, resting until it was required again on Irish tarmac. As they circled over Bristol, the view across the River Severn was the best they'd ever seen it, and Wales in all its spring finery looked very welcoming as they climbed rapidly to 8,000 feet. Carol was thinking how much the toy farms below looked as if they could be lifted from hill to hill. She pointed out to Danny the Brecon Beacons and a little later Snowdonia. Then, as they enjoyed a continental breakfast, they were over the Irish Sea and close to the Isle of Man. Danny still marvelled at how close everything was once they were airborne. And as the turboprop traced a line close to the County Down coast, they were soon enjoying the Milne Mountains and then Strangford Lough. Quickly they were losing height, banking and dropping very gently onto the runway at Belfast City Airport, nestled right in the city near to Harland and Wolff's famous shipyards and the busy Belfast docks. Locals often called it the Harbour Airport, and Danny could see why. Carol felt a clutter of almost childlike excitement as the wheels skidded and touched down at the direction of a skillful pilot with a German name. The weather forecast had been right. The whole of the British Isles, which controversially includes Ireland, was basking in warm sunshine, and the slightly tighter security than on the last trip was dished out by officials with smiles and friendliness. Soon they were in the hire car, and because Carol wanted to see it again, Danny took the route down the Newtonards Road and into the city centre, passing the City Hall and its green dome. Carol, on familiar ground, navigated Danny to the M1, which led through parts of County Down, County Armagh, and into her native County Tyrone. As they passed the Maze prison, Carol laughed as she gestured toward it. "It's good to be back home, Danny boy. You know, I could name folk from up our way from each side of the community that live in there now, and if it wasn't for the troubles, they'd be living respectable lives." Again, for old time's sake, Carol persuaded her husband to divert off the motorway and into the town of Lurgan. As they ate ice cream in Carnegie Street, Carol teasingly admitted that she'd been here a few times with an old boyfriend. So that's the first part of chapter 7. So Danny and Carol are now in Ireland, going to do some investigating as well as visiting the family. Sue is in the Greens home, carrying on with the records. Ricky has some work to do down in Hampshire. How does it all fit together? Thanks for listening, my friends. Hope you're all well. Lots of love. Bye for now. Bye bye.